Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back to Swan Signal Live. So we've got a special guest on the show today with Daniel Batten, and we will be covering the news after we have a discussion with Daniel. Don and I will do the usual news coverage stuff, but first we've got Daniel here. He's a climate tech investor, ESG analyst, and arguably the person most responsible for kind of killing or at least diminishing the Bitcoin is bad for the environment narrative. He spent 4 years changing minds with data. His research on mining energy, grid stabilization, and methane mitigation has been cited by Cambridge, Duke, and Reuters. And he's turning the lens now on a new problem, the influence gap. His latest piece called Bitcoin's Most Important Fork, the Influence Upgrade. And that's what we're here to talk about primarily today. So Daniel, welcome.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's just dive into it. You posted this article on Twitter February 12th, and you said that it's probably the most important Bitcoin long form article that you've ever written because of its timing. Bitcoin's at a crossroads. So sounds like you think we need an influence upgrade. You're saying that we've largely won this environmental battle, but we're losing a new narrative war. And so what does the data show, and just the premise of the article, and then we'll get into it more specifically.
Yeah, great question. So a bit of background. I never saw myself as spending a whole lot of time fighting FUD about Bitcoin and the environment. But for me, before I did that, I spent a lot of time coaching people, coaching technology entrepreneurs, specifically working on them, pitching for capital, and then leading them through that journey. Before that, I had to pitch for capital myself and learn how to be a technology entrepreneur. And through that whole stage, I learned a lot through first principles about the importance of being able to reach your next group of adopters, whether that was investors or whether that was prospective customers, and about just technology adoption curves generally. And so for me, when I was stepping into the front line of fighting environmental FUD, it was a chance for me to take the field again. And rather than train other people to do it myself. And so a lot of the principles I used, yes, there was a lot of data, there was a lot of analysis, but there was also, it required a lot of good framing, good storytelling, good use of analogies, making the complex simple, staying in rapport with people whilst challenging their perspectives. And that worked pretty well. And then at the start of this year, I asked myself, well, how can I have the biggest impact for Bitcoin? And the answer was not do more environmental FUD fighting. The answer was twofold. It was number one, well, you're a coach, so coach other people to do that. And so I ran a seminar on that, and Swan's been kind enough to put it up on their channel, which is great. So that education reaches more people because it is something people can learn. And that gave me the freedom to really come back to what I do well, which is coaching other people. And specifically, I wrote a book on influence, on pitching, and I could see there was a gap. And the gap that I saw, and I'm not the only one who's seen it, a lot of people have started to see it, particularly in the bear market. We started to see some of the warning signs that this was going to happen, that as the OGs sold, we didn't have a new catalytic event. We didn't have a new cohort of buyers coming in. Mm-hmm. And it's not because the product's no good. We've got the best product in the world. So when people aren't buying, and it's not a problem with the product, well, what could it be? It could be the user interface. Maybe people find it too complicated to use somehow. Well, that's possible, and that's always true. But also, we've got to look at the other aspect, which is the sales and marketing team. And we don't have a sales and marketing team, but on the other hand, we're all the sales and marketing team.
Yeah.
And when we look at how effective we've been at that, and particularly as Bitcoin reaches its next potential cohort of mainstream adopters, you can see that there's a lot of areas where we're falling short of what's needed, number one. And it's not just a skill set issue, it's also a mindset issue, where sometimes we pride ourselves in having great self-sovereignty and being high agency, but we haven't always been high agency in some of our responses, which is to blame the other person for not getting it. Or people don't get Bitcoin because they don't have high financial literacy. People don't get Bitcoin mining because they don't have good energy literacy. It's all too easy to blame the customer. But a business that blames the customer or the prospective customer actually goes out of business. The high agency response to say, how can I better reach this customer? Maybe the set of messages that led me to adopt Bitcoin are not what the next cohort needs. And that's becoming increasingly apparent. So us here on this call, we're not representative of the next wave of adopters. We're representative of the last wave of adopters, perhaps 2 waves ago. So whatever resonated with us and caused us to come to Bitcoin, it's highly, highly unlikely that that's the message that we pass on. So there's a time where great introspection is required to ask, well, what is the message? What is the brand of Bitcoin? Are we doing a good job of representing that brand? And are we taking the right message? And do we have the right messengers to reach these next cohorts of adopters, whether that's retail, whether that's small business owners, whether that's sovereign wealth funds, whether that's charities, whether that's the boards of corporates, whether that's pension funds, bank owners. And not just is the message right, but how are we engaging with them? Are we following the good tried and true principles of human engagement, which is you listen first, identify needs first, and only then open your mouth? Or are we going with a set idea of what we think they want to hear, and it's more lecture? Are we doing Bitcoin education, or are we doing Bitcoin evangelism?
Yep.
So these are some of the questions that it's germane for us to be asking at this time.
Yes. So you're saying the deep philosophical essays about Bitcoin and time, or comparing Bitcoin to mycelium, is not going to do the trick.
Those are great for a certain cohort of people. I'm never going to diss them.
Yeah.
It's like those are fantastic for certain types of people.
Yes.
And we all know that's not the majority of people. So what else do we need in addition to that?
Yep. Good point.
So Daniel, I have to say 2 things quickly. One, just commend you on all the environmental FUD busting. I know you're kind of focusing on a slightly different path here, which makes sense because you've done so much of it, but commend you on it because not only did you have the ability, but you had the patience to do it. I can't tell you how many of your pieces I read where I was just like, wow, he actually went through everything in so much detail. So good on you for doing that. And then number 2, I was listening to you on Brandon Gentile's podcast recently, and you introduced a word that I had never heard before. Is it ambivert? Am I getting that right?
Correct.
Okay. That was phenomenal. You just made me think of it again because you were talking about how are we interacting with new people in Bitcoin. And I think that's where the context that you brought it up in. And I assume it means in between an introvert and an extrovert, or maybe taking some characteristics of each.
Yeah, it's better than that. Think of ambidextrous. Ambidextrous doesn't mean you use your left and your right hand together necessarily, but it means you're equally equipped at using either. So an ambivert is very comfortable playing the role of the introvert, which is great because it means they can introspect, they can self-reflect, they can listen. They don't have the need to speak up. But also they're capable within a conversation of playing the extrovert, of taking the lead, taking direction, challenging a perspective while staying in rapport. And so the people who we need in this next part of the journey are equally comfortable doing both.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I've always felt like introvert and extrovert were a little too mutually exclusive, or they're always pitched that way. So I heard that word and I was just like, oh, why have I not heard of that before? So thank you for bringing that up. Brady, should we get into some of our questions, or where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. I can kick it off. So let's go with, there was a Nakamoto project survey. And this is one that surveyed, if we get any of the details wrong, let me know, but 3,500 Americans, and that some of their entrenched beliefs, which were things listed as such as just general distrust or a perceived immorality or perceived uselessness, were their biggest barriers to Bitcoin ownership. And that was actually stronger than any demographic factor or political factor. So that seems pretty damning when you hear that. What do you think is the best way to try to combat some of those perceptions?
We have to look at how that perception arose. Where did that message come from? It certainly didn't come from, for the most part, Bitcoiners. Perhaps occasionally it might have come from some Bitcoiner behaving badly and riling people, but generally speaking, it hasn't. Generally speaking, this perception has come because that has been the story told by the enemies of Bitcoin. And they have done a superb job in branding Bitcoin. And we've made it easy for them by not providing a strong alternative brand that appeals to the next cohort of users. So into that gap has come the branding, which has come from those who do not necessarily want Bitcoin to succeed for a whole host of reasons. So when we look at some of the narratives, we're very familiar with them. Let's take, for example, the environmental narrative. Yes, it's true that mainstream media is reporting on that much better now. But that doesn't mean we've won the battle because, okay, in the last 2 years, we might have had 20 articles in the mainstream media about how good Bitcoin is for the environment. But we had 400 plus articles in the 4 years previous about how devastating it was for the environment.
Yeah.
And so I continually come up against this politician or this regulator or this policymaker or this ESG committee member who's saying, oh, yeah, but Bitcoin's terrible for the environment, is it? And we can't blame them. It's because it's not the job of the newspapers to say, sorry, guys, we got it wrong for the last 4 years. Mea culpa, here's the real story. Not going to happen. Nor is the news media going to say, hey, we know we told you that Bitcoin was mostly powered by fossil fuel, and that was true, but now it's mostly powered by sustainable. Not going to happen. It's not interesting news for them to tell. So most people's understanding is very out of date. So it's been created by those people who had a vested interest, who had access to a powerful PR machine, and they've done a very good job. Now, we can complain about that, or we can do something much more empowering, which is to learn from it. What would happen if we were to do the same? If we were to actually use the power of PR, the power of branding to better tell our story? We've had a great example of how not to do it from Coinbase. But what if we actually did it well? What if we told an authentic story and did our equivalent of the 1984 Apple campaign, right? So how could we better brand Bitcoin is a story which we've got to ask ourselves. We look at the state of reality and how things are and how people perceive Bitcoin, the neuro associations that people are making, either with the Trump family or Jeffrey Epstein has been the latest one. And it's just all too easy. You don't have to have arguments. You don't have to have data. All you need to do is tell a message repeatedly, and then it'll become the norm. Well, why don't we repeatedly tell the message, which is going to resonate with a mainstream audience, about Bitcoin's genuine virtues which are anchored in truth. And it's not necessarily that it's freedom money. It's not necessarily that it fights currency debasement. It's not necessarily tying it to a set of libertarian values that may or may not be things that brought us to Bitcoin, but it's understanding that we've got to meet people where they're at. And if they don't know what the problem is that Bitcoin solves, then starting with telling them how Bitcoin fights currency debasement when they don't know the problem in the first place, and for them to accept that framing of Bitcoin as a solution they didn't know there was a problem too, is asking them to take on a lot very suddenly. It's a high cognitive bandwidth for them to take on. And sometimes it's scary because it requires them to admit that some fundamental things they thought were not broken about the world are actually broken. A lot of people just don't want to believe that. So what's an easier, simpler message that we can give them that will resonate with them today? Whether that's a sovereign fund, whether that's a sovereign nation, whether that's a pension fund, or whether that's a retail adopter of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue actually into the next question I had for you, which is you lay out the hierarchy of needs in the article. And so obviously we need to create some new messages. You talk about how we might do that, like what's a guide for us to do that. And we want to give this kind of self-actualization talk to a starving person, right? Is one of the examples you use. So what does safety, quoting, that's quoting a word that you use of these kind of hierarchy of newcomer needs. So what does safety actually look like for a person in a running a pension fund, or care? What does care look like for someone, in a corporate boardroom?
Well, I'm going to use an example of some people who are doing an extraordinary job of this already. So this is people like Sam Roberts, who orange-pilled UK's first pension fund, and also the first pension fund in the world to do a 3% allocation to Bitcoin. People like Ismail, who is the CEO of Evergive, and they're the first organization in the world who's made it possible for charities to be able to accept Bitcoin in large volumes. Or these are the sorts of people who are already doing it. So we can look at the examples of what's already working. And what these people do is, firstly, they make sure that the person knows that they're not going to be told off or made to feel like they're a fool or ignorant by voicing their opinions or voicing their viewpoints about Bitcoin. So they need to know that they're safe to do that. And we may not agree with them, but we can at least empathize and say, well, look, I understand why you said that. Rather than, what a fool, why could you say that? No, you're wrong. Big difference. When someone says to me something which is untrue, such as, well, Bitcoin's an environmental disaster, it uses too much energy, I would typically say, well, I understand why you say that. And then I'll just pause. Now, why would I do that? Now, I don't agree with them, but I absolutely honor that person's right to hold that position. And I do understand why they say that, because they've been drinking from the poison well of the media. So I have complete empathy for that position. That creates safety. That gives a person a signal. You can voice your objections. Now, if they don't feel safe, they're still going to have objections, but they're going to be thought bubbles, not speech bubbles. And if they're thought bubbles, not speech bubbles, then we can't have a dialogue, and I can't help to turn that person's perspective from a one which is based on unsound data to one which is based on sound data.
Yeah.
The second thing in terms of caring is, often we care more about converting the other person than we do about the other person. That's not care. Care means you are unattached to what the result of your conversation about Bitcoin is. Obviously, you would like that the person adopted it and used it because you know that's going to benefit them, but you're not attached. You realize this person has agency just like you do, and that's their personal decision, that they have sovereignty too. And part of sovereignty means that you cannot impose your will upon another person. So you respect their right to take what you say in whatever form and do what they want with it. And maybe they'll adopt Bitcoin. Maybe it'll take 3 conversations before they do. But giving them that care, that you care more for them than you do about your personal agenda. So that's care. And then alignment. People very seldom will change their perspective if they don't feel that there's a strong alignment of values, and they don't like you as a person, but they don't feel that in some way you have a tribe that you share which is in common. So what could that tribe be? Well, when I'm talking to environmentalists, that's relatively easy because I am an environmentalist. When I'm talking to a pension fund, I might have to explore a little bit more what tribe that we're both part of, because it's not immediately obvious. And it may be the tribe that we're both investors. We both run funds, even though the fund I run is very different. It's a technology fund and theirs is a pension fund. But we are at least, we are familiar with fiduciary duty. We're familiar with due diligence. We're familiar with going through a process before making a decision to adopt a new technology. So in that sense, we're part of the same tribe, and I can have empathy for the fact they've got a process to go through. I can't expect to have a single conversation and they adopt Bitcoin. I also understand that it's not enough, and this is where we make the mistake a lot of the time. We think the answer is to go in and say Bitcoin is digital credit, Bitcoin is digital capital, Bitcoin will suck the monetary premium out of other assets. People already know that, or they don't know about it, but they don't care about it. In most cases with a lot of these funds, they actually would like to have an excuse to be able to take Bitcoin on because they understand its performance has been very good over the last 10 years relative to all other asset classes. So we don't need to tell them about how well it can perform, nor do we need to give them a visionary message about the future of currency, because that sounds so far removed from their mandate to get wholesale returns in the next 5 years. That sounds far-reaching. It doesn't sound well anchored to what's immediately important. The issues they have are much more mundane. It's, how do I custody it? What's the social proof? Are my peers in the industry using it? Will I get whacked, metaphorically, if I adopt Bitcoin? Will I be criticized? Will I get scrutiny from my wholesale investors? Will someone say that it's a bad fit in terms of ESG? Because a lot of funds care about that. And what's the technical complexity? Will there be a high burden of understanding to take on a new asset? These are the questions that they have. And so they need to get a sense that, again, they're not talking to someone who's lecturing at them, but someone who has the archetype of a diplomat or a negotiator who's prepared to walk them through a process, ask questions, and attune Bitcoin to saying, here's how it'll work through your process. And again, I'm going to use Sam Roberts as an example of someone who's done this. This is not theory. This is exactly what he did to get the world's first pension fund to give a 3% allocation to Bitcoin. Number one, he understood intimately the decision-making process of a pension fund, so he's able to speak to that. He was a member of that tribe. And number two, he did a lot of listening. So just because he knew about pension funds, it didn't mean he knew about the process of that specific pension fund. So he asked a lot of questions. He asked about, when does it mature? When does it go to the insurer? He was also detached, and he cared more about the person in front of him than he did about Bitcoin. And what was the evidence of that? Because he said, hey, Bitcoin may not be right for you. Why might it not be right? Well, because if their fund matures in 2 years, they could be caught at the wrong part of the cycle, and it's not the right decision for them. But if they mature in 10 years or 8 years or even 6 years, then it's highly, highly likely that it is the right decision for them. Mm-hmm. So he's able to ask questions which showed he cared more about the returns and meeting the fiduciary mandates of that investment company than evangelizing Bitcoin. That earns a lot of trust, that level of non-attachment to outcome. And then he was able to model different scenarios based on 1%, 2%, 3% allocation, based on different scenarios, including Bitcoin going to zero. And what he was able to show that if Bitcoin went to zero, it would take them a few more months to meet their return requirements to wholesale investor. But if Bitcoin did what we expected it to do, then they'd meet that requirement 2 years early. And that was what allowed them to make that decision. It was less visionary communication about Bitcoin as the future of sound money or digital capital or digital credit, more the ability to walk them through a process and tailor the communication to the person in front of them. And so again, I'm using pension funds as an example, but you could equally say small business owner, retail adopter of Bitcoin, person in the streets, right? Sovereign nation, exactly the same process as what is required. That archetype of the patient diplomat and the ambassador for Bitcoin, who can listen, who can walk through a process, and you can tailor the communication to where the person's at and what they care about.
Can I ask just a kind of a big picture question? And I think everything you're saying could be considered an answer to what I'm about to ask, but I would love for you to just address it kind of directly. What would you say to someone who says Bitcoin is a new technology, just like the internet was a new technology, and proactive advocacy for the internet was not really what mattered? It was more so people just seeing firsthand that using the internet made their life better. And that's really what matters. You know, kind of, I guess you could frame it as utility over any sort of persuasion. What would you say to someone who has that view?
I think that's a really good point, and we have to remember that. I would say it's a both, because what's different about Bitcoin compared to the internet, yes, the internet disintermediated industries too. Yes, that had negative coverage too. However, it didn't have the same level of negative coverage. And what was different about the internet is there was no penalty if you were late to adopt it, other than you just got to use clunkier technology for longer. Whereas with Bitcoin, there's a penalty. So psychologically, there's a lot of journalists who you will have picked up on, I'm sure, who are very anti-Bitcoin. And yet they were the same people who saw it early, had the opportunity to invest early, did not, and now are strongly allied against it because they're justifying their earlier decision not to invest. That was not the case with the internet. So there are some differences with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And You're right. Absolutely. Part of and so here's why it's a both, because you're absolutely right. We have to get more people seeing it and using it as well. The message, never sell your Bitcoin, is the wrong message for the next wave of adopters. It's the right message for hodlers because they understand what it means, but it's the wrong message for the future wave, because never in the history of humanity has there been any technology that went viral where its number one use case was not to use it. The automobile, imagine if the automobile comes in, but people buy the automobile because they see that if they buy it and they hodl it in their garage and they never use it, that its value will go up over time. Well, that's what they believe. So they never ride it on the road because that could create wear and tear and lessen its value. The automobile never would have taken off. Why did the automobile take off? Because despite the FUD from the horse and buggy industry, people who are actually riding horses would see automobiles going past them at 3 times the speed, carrying twice the number of passengers. And they're like, why am I riding this horse when I could be in that automobile in comfort? And then they'd see someone doing it when it was raining. And they're like, why am I riding this horse, which is slow, can only carry 1 passenger, and I'm getting wet when I could be riding in comfort with 3 passengers at twice the speed? So Bitcoin must be used because that's when virality happens. So you're 100% right.
So by used, you mean, because some people might say that hodling is a use case.
It's a use case.
We're using it for,
linguistically, that's correct.
But you're talking about like medium of exchange, and
it's not a social use case. It's not a viral use case. It's because you don't see someone hodling it.
Yep.
Whereas you do see someone using it because you take out your phone and you exchange with another person, other people waiting in line. They get curious, what's that? And so that's where the virality takes in. It's when it's using it in a way which is seen by other people. So that's incredibly important. So I'm a huge advocate that we shouldn't wait until it establishes itself as a store of value first and then look at medium of exchange. We've got to do both in parallel.
Yeah,
that's absolutely true. And in addition to that, it's also important because Bitcoin is not only a technology, but it's also an asset. And so that's different to the internet.
Yep.
And so if you look at assets and new assets, such as when, for example, equities became used by sovereign wealth funds and pension funds for the first time, that required a lot of advocacy. That wasn't just through using, that was people doing a lot of education. So yes, we should follow the recipe of the internet and get people using it. And we should also follow the path of what happened and what made equities used by these big funds. And that was a very good job of answering the concerns of these large funds that equities was too risky, walking them through the difference between perceived risk and actual risk, and doing a lot of good quality advocacy, education, and outreach. So it's a both.
Yeah, and I mean, this just occurred to me while you were talking. Comparing Bitcoin adoption to internet adoption or other technological adoption like the car that you mentioned, the automobile itself as a technology didn't have competition, right? The internet itself, no competition. It's just there's one internet for network effect purpose or reasons, right? Bitcoin is a technology like the internet. It's built on top of the internet. So there are kind of compounding network effects there. But Bitcoin, the asset, does have competitors, right? There's gold, Absolutely. There's equities, there's all kinds of other ways to store value. There's other ways to conduct medium of exchange, obviously a lot of ways. So Bitcoin, the asset, does have competitors. Unlike Bitcoin, the technology itself, there is just one Bitcoin network, and there won't ever be another Bitcoin network. There won't ever be another internet. There's cars are cars, and there's different types of cars, but as a technology, it's been around for a long time, and it's roughly the same form. So that is interesting, and I haven't that distinction between Bitcoin the technology and Bitcoin the asset in terms of competition for adoption, I hadn't really connected before. Makes sense.
So it has competitors as a store of value, and it has competitors as a medium of exchange. Now, of course, we know that it's technologically and in every which way superior, but the people we're talking to don't understand that yet. And so a lot of patience is required because, again, I'll give you an example. I was talking to Femi from the Human Rights Foundation just recently, and he said he's got a friend who is the Minister of Innovation in a certain African country. And whenever he talks about Bitcoin, this Minister of Innovation says, yeah, but Bitcoin isn't innovative, not like other blockchains. And so there's a need for educating those sorts of people to explain to them that it's like, you don't want the base layer to be innovating and changing.
Yeah.
The base layer is the foundations. You don't want to be innovating the foundations of your house every year, because then you can't build something stable on top of it.
Yeah.
So the protocol should be unchanging so that the application layer can be rapidly changing. If you have a rapidly changing protocol layer, you cannot change the application layer. So it's a mindset shift. But again, there's been a lot of people selling altcoins, let's say, who have used the narrative and have said, well, Bitcoin's unchanging. It hasn't changed for a long time. These are innovative new technologies and they're better. And that seems to resonate well with people who say, I'm the Minister of Innovation. So again, part of the education that we're doing, not indoctrination, but education, we're not often meeting people at ground zero. We're meeting people who have already had a competitor Bitcoin come in and spread some information which is less than complete, let's say. And so there's a need for some re-education before we can even start from ground zero.
Yeah.
And so it's incredibly important, because if we don't do that, then other people will.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the network, and I think there is a very good comparison between Bitcoin as a network technology and the internet as a network technology. TCP/IP is 50 years old, and it's barely changed because it's the foundational layer of like transferring data over the internet.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. Exactly. So this is what network effects are about. But understanding that basic principle does make a difference hopefully would make a difference if you approach it with care in a conversation with someone who's looking at blockchain as the most innovative thing next. Solana's better because of XYZ or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so in your piece, Brian Zhang at Cambridge told you directly that prominent Bitcoin influencers had a neutral to negative impact on sovereign wealth fund adoption. I'm a Bitcoin influencer. You are arguably as well, John. So I have to ask, what do you think people like me should be doing now? Do we play a different role? Do we become the training ground for these new ambassadors? Is that who we should be talking to? These kind of the new ambassadors who are embedded inside those communities, like the pension fund community like, who was it? Sam Roberts, I think, that you mentioned. He understands that world. And so he's going to be able to speak to them and bring a Bitcoin idea. Should we be talking to those kinds of people to get this next layer of, influencers to bring in this next wave?
It depends on what you want to do, because there's no question that this role requires a lot of patience. It's not a single conversation. It's not you get up and you deliver from the podium and then the world changes. So where people like Sam are so strong is that he's able to have like the 10 conversations to 20 conversations with the compliance committees, with the ESG committees, with the head of the fund, with the board, etc., with the different components of the organization to slowly gravitate a very slow moving conservative fund towards a decision. That's not everyone's game, right? And that's okay. So the first thing is to say, are you up for that? Is that something you want to do? And if it's not, well, it's like, okay, well, I could either just hope that other people do that, or is there some way that I can encourage other people? And for me personally, I don't want to be doing a lot of that, because that is high intensity, it is high bandwidth. But if I can help to give coaching and support to other people who are doing that, that's a good use of my personal time. So that's one thing. And then in terms of Brian's comment, for context, and not many Bitcoiners know this, Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, they have had more than 30 sovereign wealth funds, 30 sovereign wealth funds, approach them specifically about reviewing their digital asset policy. Now, the average sovereign wealth fund has upwards of $250 billion of assets under management. So you do the math on that, $250 billion times 30, that's a reasonable amount of money. If they were to make a 1% allocation towards Bitcoin, even 1%, which is a third of what Larry Fink and BlackRock recommended, that would have a needle-moving impact to, of course, Bitcoin price, but more importantly, on Bitcoin adoption, if some of the most conservative investors in the world suddenly recognize that it had a valid part of a balanced portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, this is what Brian has shared. He said, look, they will not engage directly with the Bitcoin community for a couple of reasons. Number one, perceived conflict of interest. So if the person who is doing the influencing also has a Bitcoin product that they are selling other than Bitcoin, that's a perceived conflict of interest. Secondly, the high profile influencers. So these are people with 500,000 plus Twitter followers. They generally have a communication style which is not well suited for very conservative, slow-moving pension funds. Not always, but generally speaking. It's very well attuned to talking to visionaries and innovators, so they play a very important role, but it's not a good vibe fit for the sorts of people who are running these large conservative institutions. So there's a different archetype required as well. Now, one of the smartest things we can do is to say, well, if Cambridge has this sort of reach, and not just reach, but very trusted reach, because they're a third party, they don't have a position on Bitcoin, they simply give data. But Cambridge play a very important role because most of the reasons that pension funds, sovereign funds, family offices, etc., do not invest into Bitcoin is not because of actual risk, it's because of perceived risk. And when Cambridge published data, just good factual research on Bitcoin, it takes a lot of the perceived risk off the table and it gets them focusing on what they should be doing, which is actual risk. So they will answer questions such as volatility. They'll do objective comparisons to Microsoft and Apple and say that actually it's in the middle through the first 17 years of its life cycle. If the pension fund has an ESG concern, they'll reference their own data and say, well, the network is 52.4% sustainable. It does mitigate methane. And that's not coming from a Bitcoin maxi. That's just coming from them doing a good job reporting data. So where we can be more intelligent tactically is how Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance is funded. It's funded by a few places, one of which is the Gates Foundation. And I think there's possibly even the World Trade Organization is one as well.
Okay.
Right? So do you think they're going to fund Bitcoin research?
Probably not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They will fund every piece of research except Bitcoin research. So here you have this whole institute which has massive level of reach into sovereign funds, but the funders of that, you have to look at who's funding them. They're not allowed to do Bitcoin research. So if they do, it's got to come from their own operating budget or someone who's working long hours in that day to make something happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. So one of the smartest things we could do is actually just give them some money and say, do some research. And they will say, well, you have no ability to control what we say. And we say, we don't care. We just want good quality research, because at the moment, these pension funds, these sovereign funds do not have the necessary research they need to be able to make decisions about Bitcoin. If you were to produce more of these artifacts, that would help immensely in them basing their decisions on data rather than misinformation, conjecture, inference, and perceived risk rather than actual risk. So that'd be one thing we could do, which would be very tactically smart.
I've got one, Brady. Oh, did we lose Brady? Do I still have you, Daniel? I do, right? Oh,
you got me. Oh, Brady's
back.
here.
Okay. Brady's
Internet
back.
hookup or hiccup.
Did you have one? There's one I wanted to lob in, but if you had something, Brady,
lob away, my friend.
Okay. I think most people would agree. So I imagine you would agree, Daniel, that there have been different it's obviously an oversimplification, but there's been different waves or cohorts of people that have come into Bitcoin over time. And, different people could slice and dice it different ways, but obviously started with the cypherpunks. And then maybe it was like an underground utility internet money, like kind of the Silk Road era. Then maybe it was like the crypto, hey, this is a new technology, 2017 Bitcoin crypto ICO type people came in. And then 2020, it was like, hey, COVID is crazy. There's about to be inflation. Look at all this money printing. And then I think after that, maybe you would call it like more institutional Bitcoin's a portfolio asset type people came in. Again, that can be sliced and diced different ways, but I think that's a generally fair summary. I guess 2 questions. What do you think is the next? What will be the theme of the next big cohort of people that come in? And do you think we have, the second question, do you think we have the ability to shape who that cohort is, or is it largely dependent on world events and we just need to be more ready with the right framework and mindset and narratives when that cohort does come in?
It'll be both. Definitely there'll be some opportunistic things that will happen. No one could have anticipated COVID and what that would do to money printing and therefore the opportunity for Bitcoin's narrative. So it is important to be alert to these world events and to be opportunistic with, oh, this has happened, so now we can frame Bitcoin as an answer to this problem we didn't know was going to occur 6 months ago. And to the question about, is it up to us in terms, absolutely, we can influence that incredibly strongly. And we know that from history, because if we look at some of the last eras you were describing, particularly since 2021, why did Bitcoin price rip at the end of 2020 and 2021? Well, a few reasons, but the biggest ones were strategy suddenly acquired a whole lot of Bitcoin. And on the back of that, a whole lot of other corporates started acquiring a whole lot of Bitcoin. And there was a massive price movement. Okay, why did Bitcoin start to rip at the start of, or in Q1, in late Q1, early Q2 in 2024? ETFs. And then why did Bitcoin rip in 2025, November? US election. Okay, so those look on the surface like they were events. But if we dig a little deeper, these events did not just randomly occur. Michael Saylor didn't just wake up one day and say, I've had a vision and a dream, I'm going to buy Bitcoin. I think it was Eric Weiss who had a conversation with him, right?
Yep.
Donald Trump did just not wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to change my campaign. No, Tracy had a chat with her, and a few other people had chats with him as well, and the Trump family. And as a result,
not to mention all the crypto lobby money.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that as well. But I'm focusing on Bitcoin here.
Yeah, I understand.
And suddenly there was a positional change because he had been very anti-Bitcoin previously. Why did Larry Fink and the directors of Fidelity suddenly change their minds about Bitcoin? They didn't just randomly decide that one day. People had conversations with those prominent people. Again, same archetype. Patient ambassadors who sat down, had conversations with them, met them where they're at, didn't proselytize about the future of sound money, but just heard them out and were able to answer their concerns on a number of issues. So we've already seen the power of a single conversation on Bitcoin adoption. We just need to have a few more of those conversations. The right people with the right message, with the right person at the right time. So I'm very confident if we look back at what's happened with Bitcoin historically, if we simply do more of what's working, we can have a profound influence on Bitcoin adoption. We already know what works. We just got to do more of it. We already know what doesn't work, and that's allowing Bitcoin's enemies to tell Bitcoin's story and to create Bitcoin's branding. So there's an opportunity for us to do that. And I look at this in a very positive way. And I say, well, look, if Bitcoin's doing as well as it is, with the level of branding we've given it, with the level of branding that other people have been giving Bitcoin, just imagine what's possible when people start to find out the truth about Bitcoin. When we start to brand Bitcoin ourselves, which happens with most technologies, when we start to really tell Bitcoin's story in a way which is sensitive to the person we're talking to, I mean, that's exciting because the opportunity is there. They're ready for Bitcoin. And I get the feeling they're waiting for us to step up and tell the story better, articulate the message better. And when we do that, that's when we'll see things start to take off. That's when we'll see these new catalytic events. Because at the moment, we don't have a lot of these big catalytic events on our horizon, but we can create them. And the next catalytic event could be the first major sovereign fund or pension fund of the world who makes a sizable allocation, like a 1%, 2%, 3% allocation to Bitcoin. That would be a catalytic event, because then that would say to the whole pension fund community in the world, the whole sovereign fund and the community in the world, look at Bitcoin. We have, and then that social proof starts to kick in. Now, I've been concentrating a lot on some of these big funds, and I know a lot of people say, well, that's not what inspires the next wave of adoption. That's the man and woman in the street. And I agree. That's actually true. That'll have more of an impact on price, but it won't have more of an impact on winning hearts and minds. So it's equally important that the people like Luke Cortez in Buena Vista, Colorado, who's been working in his local community to onboard 13 business owners to come across to Bitcoin, which is more than Colorado Springs. Now, Buena Vista has a population, I think, about 1,500 people. Colorado Springs has almost 500,000. So that's a pretty extraordinary thing he's achieved. And how has he achieved that? He's just met with local members of the community and talked to them about Bitcoin. He ran a treasure hunt where he got members of the community, 25 new people who'd never used Bitcoin before, got them spending Bitcoin in store. These stories are equally important, these grassroots stories of community adoption. And he runs a meetup every week with a local community, and he encourages people to do things like say, hey, if you walk into a store and they're not accepting Bitcoin, just drop in that question and say, hey, by the way, can I pay in Bitcoin? Even if you know they don't. And they'll say no. And you say, oh, well, tell me when you start.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you drop a seed like that, these are simple actions that all of us can do. So you don't have to, sometimes it's easy to say, well, that's okay, Daniel, for you to say, but I don't have connections to a sovereign fund or a hedge fund. Well, you do to your local grocery store. And you do have these many touch points. And when you start to just ask that question and put Bitcoin on their radar, it doesn't take any time. It's not going to mean they're going to adopt Bitcoin the next day, but if they get 3 honey badgers over the course of 3 months who ask the same question, sooner or later, it's going to filter up to the management team, and they're going to start to say, what is this Bitcoin, and why are people suddenly talking about it?
Yeah.
So there's these simple actions that we can all do. And similarly, when you start to get a community, I don't think Bitcoin is going to take off as a medium of exchange in the big cities. I believe it's going to take off in the small towns first, because these are the places where the peer-to-peer network effect has not been broken, where people feel connected to the local community and they feel connected to their local businesses. And Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer technology, so it works very well when you're in a community where those peer-to-peer transactions and that feeling of agency and autonomy within your community is strong. Bitcoin is the ultimate technology to support that, so that money doesn't siphon out of the community, but it stays going peer-to-peer, this business to that business, this buyer to this business owner. And helping more of these smaller communities to adopt Bitcoin, quite easily we can get to the point where you've got 10%, 20% of the business owners in that whole community using Bitcoin, and then you cross the chasm. Then you're into the early majority, and you've shown it can be done. And then you get to the point where you've got more people in the small towns using Bitcoin in the big city. And then the big city goes, hey, I thought we were supposed to be the ones who are progressive. Why are we behind? And people in the same community saying the same thing, because they're leaving the city to go and visit these smaller communities to spend Bitcoin. And that's when the cities come on board.
Yeah. And Square releasing, because Square has, I think, tens of millions of merchants around the country, and enabled Bitcoin purchases. You can convert Bitcoin into USD, so it's easier for a merchant who doesn't really want to or hold Bitcoin to actually accept it still. So, and your thoughts here made me think of this. If you see one of those Square terminals, right? It's the white ones that spin around, so you can, if you see one of those, you can just ask, hey, I see you're using a Square terminal here, and you can accept Bitcoin. Do you accept Bitcoin? I'd like to pay in Bitcoin. Do you have that enabled? And a lot of the merchants don't yet, right? I think it was only like, I don't know what the number is now, but in the few weeks after that became available to Square merchants, it was only like it was single digit percent had, enabled the ability to get Bitcoin. So that's one that would actually they could do it with a few taps.
Absolutely.
They're already
It makes a
enabled to.
difference.
So that would make the question even more powerful because someone can do something about it right away.
Yeah, just because someone has a sign on the outside of the business saying we accept Bitcoin doesn't mean they're accepting a whole lot of it, and doesn't mean that the people in that business are trained how to do it.
Yeah.
This was brought home to me when I was in Lugano a couple of years ago, and I specifically went to order a pizza, of course, and pay for it in Bitcoin. And when I said I wanted to pay for it in Bitcoin, the woman who was serving me went, and then clearly had no idea what to do, and then went off to ask someone else, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I think we've got that thing in the back cupboard somewhere. Where is it?" And they then spent 3 minutes looking for it. Now, of course, if I hadn't been a Bitcoiner, I would have said, "Forget it, I'll spend cash." But I didn't. I patiently waited because I wanted to. That was an important part of getting them familiar with the idea that people wanted to spend in Bitcoin, and they were prepared to wait.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, the manager came out and looked at this machine and kind of wiped the dust off it. Clearly, it had never been used, and then was working out for the first time himself how to process a transaction in Bitcoin. The whole exchange took about 10 minutes. But when they did, I just said, "Thank you." It wasn't, and they were like, "Oh, actually, that wasn't so hard." But there's these little moments where, again, if I hadn't gone into that pizzeria and I hadn't asked to pay in Bitcoin and I hadn't sat through the process, then they wouldn't have had that first opportunity to get comfortable with that new technology. So you never know what the impact of just asking that question, can I pay in Bitcoin? Can I pay in Bitcoin? They hear that enough times, and then sooner or later that has a virality effect. So all of our actions do matter.
I'll just say I totally supportive of spend and replace, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think people have to hold on to their Bitcoin for 10 years. But on the flip side, I'm also not saying use all of your Bitcoin to buy
100%
pizza.
not. Correct.
I always try to signal to a merchant. Their pub key is in New York, where I am. So every time I go to pub key, am I paying in Bitcoin via the Lightning Network? Of course I am. If there are some online merchants that I know accept Bitcoin, I will pay in Bitcoin, and your DCA will replace that. It's or if we have a 50% decline in price, I'm happy that I bought that shirt in Bitcoin last year because I spent my Bitcoin at a higher price. It works out just fine.
I think you make a really good point, John, because sometimes we get into these debates about, is it a store of value, is it a medium of exchange, et cetera, and clearly it's both. It's that simple. And again, the people who promote it, if you're in the West, you'll be more likely to see its utility as a store of value. If you're outside the West, if you're in South Africa or in Costa Rica or in Angola or Argentina, you're more likely to see it as a medium of exchange. So your perception of Bitcoin will be based partly on your demographic and your geolocation. And again, it can be both, because you can decide, well, I am going to save. I am going to hodl 99% or 92% or 99.9% or whatever you decide it is. But this fraction I am going to put to use. And you might have different reasons for doing it. You might do it just because it's fun to use. You might do it because you believe in Bitcoin. Or you might think, okay, I'm primarily interested in number go up, but I understand that number goes up for two reasons. Number one is scarcity and OGs who hold on to their Bitcoin. But number two is Bitcoin price goes up. How does Bitcoin price go up? Where Bitcoin adoption goes up. How does Bitcoin adoption go up? Where people see other people using Bitcoin, so I can contribute to that. So even in pure economic returns perspective, it makes sense to optimize. And the optimal number of how much you should hodl, it's not 100%. As I say, it may be 99.9% or 99%. But if each person makes that individual decision and says, yes, I'm going to hodl the majority, and I'm also going to participate in the creation of a circular economy that's going to increase adoption, that's actually going to end up better for me from a low time preference point of view.
Agreed.
So we talked about this in the pre-show just a little bit, and I thought we could close up with this because I think your thoughts are valuable for others to hear. AI is the topic of the moment, and we hit an inflection point with it, a few weeks ago with Claude 4.6 and Claude Cowork, and Claude Code's been around for a while, but a lot more people are being exposed to it now. Cowork especially, which sort of blends the chat and the code function together and makes it more accessible for non-engineers, non-coders. And just 4.6 model is just another level. It's like actually the context window is really long, and it's like actually interacting with another human being on a project, like a peer on a project. So companies are adopting it. Swan is fully codified at this point. And it's just advancing faster and faster. So what's your take on AI in general, impact on jobs and the economy, and wherever else you want to take it?
3 out of 4 people that I talk to, AI will come up in conversation. But that's a very skewed sample because most of the people I talk to are other Bitcoiners. And so that's a portion of the population who are already used to using nascent technology early. Generally speaking, fewer people are talking about it, but it's starting to change very fast. And as with Bitcoin, a lot of the mainstream commentary has been negative. It's going to take our jobs. It's going to strain grids. It's going to harm rural communities. This is the rite of passage of every nascent technology. We see the negatives before we see the positives, because as humans, that's how we're wired. When something is uncertain, and any nascent technology is uncertain and unclear, it's in our survival interests to treat it with suspicion and negativity first, for very strong evolutionary reasons. And if we didn't have that algorithm as humans, we wouldn't have survived as a species. So we can be grateful for that. After a little while, we start to understand the technology better. We start to see its positive use cases. This has happened with Bitcoin as well. And the narrative starts to change. It takes a little longer with Bitcoin, as I say, because it's also an asset. And there's also the people who missed that asset who are still writing about it. And they're writing with a little bit of salt. But with AI, they won't have the same sting of having missed out early. Anyone can use, and you're not penalized for having been late to the party. So that transition to positive reporting on AI will happen, and it will happen sooner. The other factor is that what we're seeing is, yes, it is displacing jobs. No question about that. This is not the future. It's happening right now. And this is not the first time this has happened. It happened with the computer, it happened with the internet. Same fears, same concerns, same displacement of jobs. And here's what has not been commented on yet. And that's, there has never been a nascent technology in the history of humanity that has not created at least as many jobs as it has displaced. So for AI to be a net displacer of jobs, it would have to buck the trend of every other technology ever in human history. I'm not going to bet on that trend being bucked. I believe many new jobs will be created. It's just that there may be a lag, and we may see the displacement first before we see the creation. So for example, in 1998, if I'd said to you, hey, would you like to be a social media content creator? Not only would you not know what role that was, you wouldn't even know the category of role that was, because there was no such thing as social media, let alone a job within that domain. The applications hadn't even been created. So the same is true of AI. A lot of the applications have not even been created, but those applications are created by people, and they'll require people within those applications too. And one of my clients just a couple of days ago is exactly in this space. So he's a Bitcoiner. He's also doing some work with AI because he's seen the opportunity. And he said that, look, the conversations we have are not representative of the general population. Most businesses out there, most users out there are using AI tools like fast Google. Mm-hmm. That's it. They're not using a fraction of the capability. And there's a tremendous gap between how AI is currently being used by individuals and businesses and how you can use it to optimize the performance of the business. And that's going to require consultants. It's going to require education. It's going to require new applications. It's going to require new software developers. And you might say, well, the software can be done by AI. Some of it can, yes, but not all of it. We're nowhere near that stage yet. There is a dynamic range with software developers. Steve Jobs commented on this, where he said the best software developer is not twice as good as an average one. They're 100 times better. They can do things that an average developer cannot do. There will always be a need for those sorts of developers and designers and the people who are excelling at what they do. But where it's going to create a difference is that the society we've created, largely through our education system, where we're very good at answering predefined questions, not so great at knowing the right question to ask, that's going to have to flip. Because now we have AI, and AI is saying, I can answer a predefined question better than you can 99% of the time. So what are we training people for? We're training people into obsolescence. We're training people into roles that we know AI can do better today, let alone when they graduate from school and university. So that's when the opportunity really lies. So in terms of the future, what I'd like to see happen, I don't know if it will, but I'd like to see a real revolution in the education system where we start training people to add value on top of the things that AI can do. So not memorizing information, not answering predefined questions, but thinking of the right question to ask, more creative thinking, more lateral thinking, more seeing the cross connections between disciplines rather than thinking in narrow swim lanes. And basically saying, now that AI can do this really well, where's the stuff around the outside that really requires humans? And my hope is we'll end up creating more interesting jobs and more interesting lives for people, because we will have no choice but to create roles which encourage us to use our minds in ways which AI cannot do and will not be able to do for some time.
Yeah, I think the competitive advantage, in an AI world, and things are happening so fast now, but 5-10 years, it'll be the case where so many of these jobs have been displaced. We'll see. One thing is like solo entrepreneurs or small teams of 2 or 3 people will be able to build big businesses now. And there's tons of opportunity there then to build very niche businesses, which, the internet is a good example of this. It created, millions and millions of niche communities online and connected people around, in different parts of the world around these very niche interests. And I think the same thing will happen. Custom products, custom code, custom apps that fit very small niches will be able to be developed by a single person, and there'll be millions of them. So that's just one example. I think the competitive advantage will also just be being human, right? Being human, that's your distinct advantage against an AI. And so I think instead of knowledge working in front of our computers all the time and processing stuff in a way that AI can do extremely well already, people will be free to do something more human, very like niche things, to services to other humans, lots of entertainment. Guilds could redevelop around like artisanal creation of products that maybe you don't want coming out of a robot factory. You want a quality human version of it. Those kinds of things will, start to be able to be a lot more, I guess, doable or
orange pilling sovereign wealth funds. Humans can do that a lot better than AI. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and there's a lot of positions vacant, and we're not filling some of these positions right now. So many opportunities.
Yeah.
I'll just share one tweet that's related to all this that I thought was great and was posted today. Someone said the Claude code effect on jobs so far in my inner circle has been, or in my circles has been, that everyone who's been kind of lazy the last year or two, parentheses, like me, the person writing the tweet, is now back at their desk every possible moment because suddenly every idea is buildable over a reasonable time frame.
Yeah.
So I'm with you guys on the idea that this is going to create so many more opportunities. Of course, that doesn't mean there's not going to be some pain and disruption along the way. But I'm with you, Daniel. I wouldn't bet on bucking that trend of human innovation being a net positive.
Yeah, the big difference is the pace.
I'll give you one example. Example here that I just thought of. So one of So we have an investment fund, as you said, and we invested in this company that is doing some really smart things with optical barcoding of cells. And that's really good for a whole lot of reasons I won't get into. They have been using AI a lot to make innovations and to go faster. And the CEO of that company said, well, we could have used AI and actually laid off one of our workers, but we chose to keep that worker and reallocate them to other higher value tasks. And as a result of that decision, we are now several months ahead. Now, this never happens within technology companies, right? We are several months ahead of our development schedule. And now that enables us to think about new innovations to our business model, raising more capital at a better valuation earlier. Had they just laid a person off, all that would have happened is they would have burned through capital more slowly. So by retaining those people and reallocating them, they're actually in a better position. So I see that this is another possibility. That yes, laying off is one, but reallocating to higher value tasks and adding to the value of your company more than just AI by itself, that is another potential path. And I think we'll see more of that as well. And that's exciting.
It is. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an hour of your time. I think it was great to catch up, and I really appreciate the new work that you've been putting out, as well as all the environmental work you've done over the years. You are a legend, sir. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right.
Thanks, John.
We'll let Daniel drop, and we'll do a little bit of news coverage from the week. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, John. That was great.
That was fun. Yeah, but we're, part of me wants to riff on what we just talked about, but
we can do that too.
We went over an hour, so if we want to do news, I feel like we should probably get into that.
Okay, fair enough. All right. We'll run through this kind of like we treat it with quick hits. So we'll try to move a little faster through it. We'll talk first about the tariffs and the Supreme Court ruling that some of Trump's tariffs were not constitutional. And Scott Bessent was out to, basically set the record straight from the White House's point of view. And we'll take a look at that.
I would also like to take a moment to address today's Supreme Court ruling, and I would note that I did not change a single word in my speech post the ruling. President Trump will always put our national security and Americans first. And as I have said before, the president has multiple tools in his toolbox. Let's be clear about what today's ruling was and what it wasn't. Despite the misplaced gloating from Democrats, ill-informed media outlets, and the very people who gutted our industrial base, the court did not rule against President Trump's tariffs. 6 justices simply ruled that IEEPA authorities cannot be used to raise even $1 of revenue. This administration will invoke alternative legal authorities to replace the IEEPA tariffs. We will be leveraging Section 232 and Section 301 tariff authorities that have been validated through thousands of legal challenges. Treasury's estimates show that the use of Section 122 authority, combined with potentially enhanced Section 232 and Section 301 tariffs, will result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue in 2020.
All right. So why didn't they just do that the first time?
That's a fair question. Yeah. I'm sure there's some reason. Maybe it was the easier path, or maybe I'm not really sure. But, we have talked, tariffs is a big macro topic, so we wanted to hit on it. Isn't it crazy, Brady? It feels like it was many, many weeks ago that Supreme Court ruling came out. I literally had to check the dates. I was like, no, wait, that was 7 days ago.
It was last week. We talked about it on the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why we wanted to follow up on it, because there was news coming out on it while we were on the show last week. And the takeaway, which we had signaled on this show many times, was yes, there could be a strike down of some of the tariffs, but it was not going to be a complete strike down. There's other avenues for them to get tariffs legally approved. Maybe I think this will be a back and forth. Maybe some of the things they try might get struck down or appealed, but it's not going to be an all or nothing type thing. And I think you've seen the market reaction is agreeing with that, because there was not some big reaction to the news last week from a market perspective.
All right, let's get into price action. Is the bottom in? Little healthy hopium segment for you here. We've been ranging between 65 and 70 or so for a little while now. And we'll lean on a few of our favorites price analysts who tend to lean on fundamentals and not just TA stuff. So let's take a look at Checkmatey here. He wrote a long email, a long tweet, and I'll also show the chart here. I couldn't capture both the tweet and the chart, and this is really just kind of the beginning of it. But it highlighted Bitcoin's extreme oversold status, with mean reversion models placing current prices in the bottom 11th percentile after $7.5 billion in realized losses during November 25 and February 26 drawdowns or capitulations, you could call them, rivaling historic lows like in December 2018 and June 2022. So looking very bottom-like. And the charts here, I'll pull it up, highlights deviations from key anchors, including 200-week moving average, 58.5K is where that's at now, and realized price at 55K, which underscores a de-risked environment, according to Checkmatey, where excess leverage has been purged below 60K. Here's the chart he's looking at, John. I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so I think this is a good one just to underscore that we are seeing a lot of indicators that would imply we're close to a bottom. This is more art than science. It doesn't mean that the price can't go lower to 60 again. It doesn't mean that we cannot go to 55 or 50. But it certainly seems like we're close to a bottom. A lot of this is based on patterns in the past holding. So again, more art than science. This is not physics. But I tend to agree, just based on indicators like this. There's a whole plethora of them. Also, just conversations I'm having with people, this certainly does feel like we're getting to a bottom. There's also the indicator of the 58K gang, which I think would provide some significant support if we hit 58K once again. Obviously, I'm mostly joking there, but yeah, that and the other. Well, actually, I'll wait. I was going to say the other big topic was some of this, what Jane Street's role, but I don't want to jump ahead here too much. We'll probably touch on that in a moment.
Here's an RSI indicator from Alex Thorne saying the Bitcoin is nearing all-time oversold territory. RSI is lower than any time except the darkest of bears. Only lower readings since 2016 are November, December 2018, which Checkmatey pointed out as well. The drop from 6 to 3, and June, July 2022 when 3AC collapsed. So there's another indicator there. This is also from Alex Thorne, where he says he thinks the worst pain is almost certainly behind us, but there could still be some ahead. So the case for having the pain be behind us is that we're near 200-week moving average in realized price. As Checkmatey also pointed out, more than half of coins underwater, RSI capitulation bottom levels, and many other metrics screaming bottom. And the case for more to come, more pain to come, is the bottoms take a long time. Drift is possible. Equities rolling over would likely push lower. Malaise, a sense of lack of catalysts in the market, and the overhang from quantum fears. This tweet here from Matt Hogan gets kind of into the same idea. Conspiracy theories on, why did this happen? Why are we in a bear market all of a sudden? Binance and Wintermute and an unknown offshore macro hedge fund and Jane Street, which John, bookmarked for us. And then he just says the real reason Bitcoin's down is a bunch of people who were long sold their Bitcoin exposure. They sold it via spot, unwinding leverage positions, sold it by writing calls against their Bitcoin, sold it because of the 4-year cycle, sold it because of quantum fears. The point being, there were more sellers than buyers, and this is always the case.
Yeah, and this really is hitting on the core of what was the Twitter discussion this week, which was the latest pointing of the finger was at Jane Street for alleged suppression or market manipulation. I like that tweet in particular because I think that actually was balanced. There are some people who've been putting things out there saying like, oh, it's all because of spot selling. And I think those takes are a little too definitive. I like that Matt Hogan hit on things. He just to reiterate, he said they sold it via spot. They sold it via unwinding leverage positions. They sold it by writing calls against their Bitcoin. So that to me, I think gives a more holistic picture, because I do believe that people who use leverage and use the option complex on top of Bitcoin cause the price to move more dramatically down in this case than it otherwise would have. That kind of by definition, that's what leverage and options allow you to do. So I do think if total hypothetical here, but if there were only a Bitcoin spot market, I don't think we would have moved down as dramatically as we did. Now, you do have to make the comment that if there were only the Bitcoin spot market, we probably wouldn't move up as forcibly as we did in the past, pick your time period. So these things do cut both ways. But in general, I am of the belief that leveraged participants and people in the options market do cause Bitcoin to be more volatile, down or up. It's not all spot activity. And then on the Jane Street specific thing, I'll just make a quick comment. I do kind of discount people saying that it's all Jane Street manipulating the price or like a 10 a.m. market dump because of Jane Street. I don't really think that is likely, because that claim is very specific. You're saying a market maker who's an authorized participant on the ETFs has like some special ability to influence the price as they see fit. And I kind of fade that one. I don't really think they can do it in a meaningful way. But again, I do believe that leverage and options cause Bitcoin to be more volatile.
All right, some quick hits here. Swan CTO and co-founder Jan Pritzker, also author of probably one of the best books on understanding Bitcoin as a system, Inventing Bitcoin, wrote a thread about quantum, which I think is really good. And maybe I should just show the whole thing. It demystifies quantum computing elements, and flags risks to 7 million BTC in exposed early addresses, including Satoshi's holdings. Recent developments validate the discussion. BIP360 is proposing pay to Merkle root for quantum resistant addresses, merged into Bitcoin's repository in February, which would enable a proactive migration path before potential threats materialize. But he says the bottom line is that the expert estimates place viable quantum attacks 10 to 30 years away, though accelerated progress could shorten that to under a decade, which is still a timeline that would allow Bitcoin to make an adjustment. There's a consensus thing here that would require, I'm actually not sure if it's a hard fork or not in BIP360. Do you know? I feel like it must be, but I don't know for sure, which I feel like I should know that.
I do not know that offhand.
All right. Let's see. We'll scroll through Jan's tweet real quick.
Yeah, but I'll just say Jan is a busy guy. And I think in the past, he used to put out more content on Twitter. I'm glad to see him doing a thread again.
Yeah. Samesies. All right, here we go. We can pull some of the points out. So Bitcoin's 21 million supply cap is safe, not protected by encryption. It's a consensus rule enforced by the node network. Your Bitcoin address hides your public key behind a hash, so it's like a scrambled fingerprint. Quantum computer can't reverse that hash. If you've received coins but never spent from that address, your funds are protected. Mining is mostly safe too. Quantum gives only a modest speed up there. and Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment would simply adapt. No advantage would last long. Who is at risk? Anyone who reused addresses or received coins in Bitcoin's early days when the format exposed public keys by default. About 7 million BTC sit in addresses with exposed keys, including 1 million attributed to Satoshi. Here's the key habit that protects you. Never reuse addresses. When you spend, your public key gets exposed. But if you send your remaining balance to a fresh address, your key is hidden behind a new hash again. Old lock discarded, new lock nobody's ever seen. Most modern wallets do this automatically. Every time you spend, the wallet generates a fresh change address behind the scenes and sends your remaining balance there. You don't even have to think about it. But just in case, you can make your own coins highly quantum resistant today. Just send them all to new addresses. The attacks are then limited to trying to crack coins while in transit in the mempool. Very difficult, even if we achieved quantum supremacy. How far away is the threat? Today's quantum prototypes have a few thousand noisy qubits. Breaking Bitcoin would need millions of stable ones. Most experts say 10 to 30 years away, but the window may be shrinking with breakthroughs. And you have to imagine that AI will help out on that front as well. BIP360 proposes quantum resistant address types using math that quantum computers can't crack. The plan is to upgrade the network so everyone migrates their coins before Q day arrives. Swap the locks before someone invents the master lockpick. So TLDR, Bitcoin's supply is safe. Mining is safe. Your coins in a never reused address are safe behind a hashed address. The real risk is exposed public keys, and BIP360 gives users a clear migration path. The threat isn't here yet, but not a bad idea to prepare early. In typical Jan style, a really easily accessible breakdown of the quantum FUD.
For sure, which is one of the top bosses, to use the video game analogy, that Bitcoin will battle in the future.
That's right.
Or is battling.
Okay. So let's see. I think we have a few little quick hits. This was a funny one. Look at Bitcoin's returns over the past 10 years, showing you just how volatile and 4-year cycle-ish, and how no reasonable person could claim it as a store of value. Oh, wait, hang on. I'm being told this is actually gold's returns from 50 years ago. So these are gold's numbers from 1972 to 81. It was like 40% return, 60% return, 72% return, negative 24%, negative 4%, 20, 29, 120 up, 29, negative 32. These definitely do look like like Bitcoin returns. What was this all about, John? I mean, this is starting the year after the Nixon shock, the temporary government action that, of course, became permanent.
Yeah.
So what happened here in the 70s to gold?
I think you hit on it, which is this was the first 10 years after the delinking event of the like the first 10 years of pure fiat. And it clearly was a messy process. I think what also would be interesting, messy, like price discovery process is what I mean. It would also be interesting to show how gold did not do much for a long time. Like that peak it hit in the late 70s or early 80s, it did not recover that for quite a while. So that could obviously be debated either way. Could it be like, that could spur someone making the claim of, oh, look, Bitcoin and gold are not really needed, because in the 80s, they did kind of convince people that fiat was more sustainable. Mm-hmm. They kind of said, look, the 70s had crazy inflation, but we've got it under control. And, you don't need gold anymore. The dollar is the same. And can they convince people of that nowadays for a decade or 2 decades? I don't think so. I think the cat's kind of between the GFC and between COVID and the whole history in the 70s and beyond. I don't think they can convince people that this is an under control process here. So I fade the idea that there could be like decades where Bitcoin and gold are flat going forward.
BitDeer has sold some Bitcoin. Oh, this is the actually NYDIG. Okay. Structurally possible use cases for crypto are narrowing. This is coming from NYDIG. As Bitcoin gained dominance through this cycle for the first time ever, The data reinforce a conclusion that we have held for some time. The core attributes of open blockchains, trustlessness, permissionlessness, and censorship resistance, are uniquely suited to money and money-like financial applications. And I think what they're saying here and didn't say is uniquely suited to only money and money-like financial applications. All right, let's see. There's also a French miner who is looking to start mining in Brazil. Transmission bottlenecks have cost billions in lost revenue. They say BTC mining can help convert stranded power into a monetizable asset. Shout out to Daniel.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Bitcoin treasury firm GD Culture set to sell Bitcoin holdings to fund share buybacks. We're seeing this happen more with Bitcoin treasury companies caught offsides in this bear market.
Seems like another bottom signal, though.
Yeah. And well, here's a good one. Stretch is doing great. It's trading near par and paid dividends while Bitcoin fell 45%. So Stretch is working.
And I just find it interesting that Saylor, because in some ways you could say, oh man, Saylor's highlighting the fact that Bitcoin fell 45%, and that's a problem for his strategy overall. But he is playing the long game, obviously, and he's trying to entice people to get in on STRC, that perpetual preferred with the variable coupon. That's something around 11% or some 10 or 11% right now. And he's trying to show them, look, this is going to be stable. That's the whole idea, right? Is he's willing to pay people a stable coupon and keep it at par, so you don't even have to worry much about your investment changing value. And
which is important for taxes, obviously. So
important for taxes, and just for people who are looking to clip 10 or 11%. And
right,
they get that close to certainty. And Saylor gets their capital, and he gets to build the Bitcoin treasury. So he's pitching to those people with this type of chart here. And so far, I think you could say Stretch is working as they wanted it to. Obviously, it's not even, I think it was like July when it launched, so barely over 6 months. But he's going to continue making that case.
All right, man. I know you got to drop for a client call, so I'll bring it home here. Any final words before you drop?
No, that was a fun one. The shirt was intentional. That's the American flag and hockey sticks there. So
Let's
go
go.
Team USA.
Another miracle on ice.
All right,
sacrificing teeth for the gold medal.
Oh, Jack Hughes, baby. Legend was born last Sunday.
24-year-old too. Like, what a awesome experience for a young guy like that.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
USA. All right. See you, Brady.
See ya. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Let me just talk quickly about a couple of things that you might be interested in hearing about. First of all is BitBlock Boom, which is a fantastic Bitcoin conference. As the website says here, a true Bitcoin conference. Bitcoin only. A lot of your favorite Bitcoiners will be there. It's a great place to just meet up and hang out. April 9th through the 12th. You can grab tickets now. They're going to go up in just a little over a day and a half. So now is a good time to think about buying a ticket if you're interested. Lots of big speakers: Joe Kelly, Corey, Jimmy Song, Caitlin Long, and yours truly will be giving a talk on Bitcoin in time. And Parker is there, and Pierre. So it should be a good time to hang out with Bitcoiners. It is one of the best Bitcoin conferences out there, relatively small. And so you can really get a chance to hang out with everybody. Also, Swan Bitcoin, obviously the producer of this show. I am a co-founder at Swan, and we help people invest in Bitcoin and build generational wealth. Together, we build strong relationships with our clients. That's really our bread and butter, is getting to know you as a person and helping you develop a long-term strategy to grow your Bitcoin wealth and to pass it down over generations. In fact, we recently launched or about to launch, very close. We've got it in preview mode right now. So we have clients starting to set up accounts. You can get priority access if you go to swan.com, and it's a way for you to give real Bitcoin to the next generation with a dedicated wallet. It's not just putting Bitcoin into a different wallet on your Swan app. It's actually creating irrevocable gifts to a child that can be given by family, friends, etc. Once those gifts are made, they belong to the child. When they reach their ascension age, which you can set between 18 and 25 years old, they will get access to the wallet. So this is a fantastic new service from Swan. You could check it out. We also have Private Wealth, which is John's department. He's a leader there. This is how we develop strong relationships with clients and think long term. We also serve businesses, help you get Bitcoin on your balance sheet. We can help you think through that strategy. We've got experts who have a deep understanding of business complexity, and we've helped a lot of companies put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So if you're a small business, medium-sized business, public company, any business, we would be able to help you out and would love to do so. We have an IRA account as well. And you can come on this page and check out this calculator and put in your own assumptions and see how Bitcoin might be able to help your retirement. You can also move fiat, like if you have an old 401k or 403b sitting around from an old job, for instance, you can roll that really easily over into a Bitcoin IRA. We have people to help you through the whole process. It's very straightforward. It takes a little time to actually move the funds from the other institution, but we'll help you through the entire thing, and it can happen in a matter of days. We also have Swan Vault, which is advanced Bitcoin cold storage made simple. This is collaborative self-custody. So you own your Bitcoin, you hold it, you take full control, but you don't have to go it alone. And that's the whole point here. You have three keys. You have two offline in different locations, and you have a third key managed by you through your Swan accounts. It takes two of the three keys to send a Bitcoin transaction. If you use your cloud key, we keep a 72-hour hold on it as well, as another added layer of protection. So you can check out Swan Vault. That's for your long-term storage. And we would love to have you as part of the Swan family. So check us out at swan.com/SSL for Swan Signal Live. And we'll talk to you then. You can meet the team. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will be back next Friday, and we'll hope to see you then. Take care.